So as we all know, Anthony Davis is not going to be a member of the Pelicans for too much longer, whether that's within the next week or so, or this offseason, who really knows. I want to talk about everybody on this team not named Anthony Davis, though, because I think the Pelicans are in a very interesting spot right now, where they could attempt to actually remain kind of competitive. Not that I would do that, but I could picture them doing that, especially because they have Dell Demps as their GM, and that's pretty much the way he's always operated with trades, whether it's signing Tyreke Evans, well, that was not a trade, but that, or getting Ryan Anderson, or getting Omer Asik, all these veteran players when Anthony Davis was only in his, second or third season, something like that. So I could picture him actually going the route of trying to make this team better even without Anthony Davis, but I could also picture him and the franchise realizing, you know what, we should probably just go with a full-on rebuild, get young players, draft picks, and all that stuff. And I think depending on where they go in that route could impact the way that they look at guys like Jrue Holiday, Nikola Mirotic, and Julius Randle. And while I'm not going to mention him in this video, I do want to recognize that Jahlil Okafor has been kind of pretty damn good lately, and I might do a video on him in the future. Now, in the case of Mirotic and Randle, I don't know if these two are going to be on the team past this season because they're both effectively one-year deals. Mirotic is on a one-year deal, whereas Randle has a player option that I think he's going to decline because it's for about $9 million, and I think you could argue, given how good he's been this year as a post-up player, rebounder, and just a bulldozer to the rim, that he is perhaps playing himself into a bigger contract for this offseason. So if they were going to trade those two, they'd have to get on it pretty quickly. I think between those two players, I could picture Mirotic perhaps being a little easier for teams to think about taking on. He does make more money, but I think teams would believe that they could actually re-sign him for one, because I think Randle's going for the payday. And then number two, I think he's an easier fit for most teams because, of course, spacing and all that stuff. And I do think there are a few teams who could really be good with Mirotic. Two of them I think of immediately are the Blazers and the Jazz, two teams who need another offensive player. Utah is desperate for a power forward who can provide more spacing than just Jay Crowder. And I don't think it would be too difficult for them to actually acquire Mirotic, either one of those teams. So I think that's something we should definitely look towards for the deadline. I could picture other teams looking at Mirotic. Hell, I could picture the Houston Rockets talking about him, especially because we saw earlier they were willing to trade 4 firsts for Jimmy Butler, and they've got the Brandon Knight contract, and I believe him and Mirotic's salaries are pretty much neck and neck. Or I guess there's about a $2 million difference between them, so definitely enough for you to make a move like that work, I would guess. And then he could step in for Houston and just do his thing, shoot threes. They, of course, need that. And a similar thing can be said for those other teams that I mentioned. And, of course, I think a lot of teams would love to have Nikola Mirotic for his spacing. Hell, I could picture a team like the Bucks talking themselves into him. It's kind of like a better version of Ersan Ilyasova, if you will. And I think Mirotic could have some minutes at the backup 3 position, and he could actually be really damn good. So I think Mirotic could definitely get some traction around the league. I think a team like Toronto should also think about Mirotic because they've had some shooting problems this year. So those are just a few, but I have to imagine a lot of teams in the league would be talking themselves into Nikola Mirotic. Next, if we talk about Julius Randle a little bit, he is a bit more of an awkward fit just because his shooting is not as much of a thing, but anybody who's desperate for some scoring, I think, should consider it. Of course, that player option does throw a monkey wrench into all of it, so I don't want to take too much time on Julius because, to be honest, I don't have a real grasp of if I would even want him just because of that option, so there's that for you. If we now look at Jrue, I mean, Jrue could get you a lot because anybody who needs a point guard, and sure, that point guard position is perhaps the most loaded in the league right now, but there are still some teams that need some. Between the Pistons and the Hornets, well, I think Jrue could play next to Kemba, and he could perhaps give the Hornets a little bit more ammo to convince Kemba to stay. So there's that. I think Phoenix would do really well with a veteran point guard. I don't think they should go for a young dude. And I think a trade that could potentially get that done, I'm not saying for 100% it would, but the offer that Phoenix would make is probably something like Ryan Anderson's contract, which is up after next season. One of their young dudes that they've potentially given up on between Josh Jackson, Dragan Bender, someone like that, perhaps even Kelly Oubre, I guess, Eli Okubo, perhaps, DeAnthony Melton, something like that, maybe a combination of a few of these guys. And then the Bucks pick that they got from the Eric Bledsoe deal, which would probably convey next season. It's not an amazing return for Jrue, but it is something. I have to guess that there are other teams who could perhaps give them a better offer for Jrue. I mean, I think what's really important is how do teams feel about the length of Jrue's contract? Because at this point, I actually think his contract is a bargain. He's making $25 million. He's going to be making $26 next year. Given that the cap is going to be going up again, and because he just seems to keep on getting better as a player, I actually think that's a fair contract at this point. So when it's done, he'll be like 32, assuming he accepts that player option. I don't know. There's a chance he sucks at that age. I'm going to guess he doesn't, but that perhaps could frighten teams a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the Pelicans could definitely get something back for at least two of these guys, and then that would, of course, help them on a rebuild. But if they were to try to be as good as they can be right now, I mean, there is the idea of re-signing like Mirotic to give them real offense. Perhaps Etuan Moore still being a respectable basketball player. Jrue Holiday, if he's the best player on your team, yeah, you've definitely got an uphill climb, but assuming that there's no major drop-off between him and, let's say, the fourth best player on the team, then you could actually still be pretty alright. But I feel like the only way for that sort of a thing to happen, then they would have to say to themselves, okay, we just want like a slew of players in the return for AD. And of course you look at the Lakers' return, and I don't want to spend too long on this because I've talked about this a lot, but Lonzo given the ball a little bit more, Ingram being used a little differently, Kuzma stepping in and just doing what he does. That could be viewed as a move that can kind of give you the best of both worlds, where you can maybe still be respectable right now, and then those guys can get better. The other thing that could maybe happen, and I think this requires them to wait until after the deadline, which is what I think they should do anyway, is some other team could talk themselves into this conversation, right? I mean, if the Nuggets came to you and said, we'll give you Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, and then a couple other things not named Nikola Jokic, then that could also be a situation where you get two good young players who can keep getting better but can also help you win right now. You could argue the fit with them and Jrue could be a little awkward because of the size, but something to that effect. Insert nearly every other team. Of course, some teams are not in the running because they're not good enough and he would leave in a year, but you just never know with this stuff. I could picture some team coming out of nowhere saying, we will give you this package that can kind of make you respectable right now and give you a chance to keep on improving, and the Pelicans jumping on that. Then, of course, from there, if you're going to go that route, you have to not screw yourself in terms of bad contracts and things like that, so you don't get stuck around the 6th seed or potentially missing the playoffs by a little bit. So there's a risk in going that route, but it can be done successfully. It'll be interesting to see the route that the Pels go, and that's pretty much it.